Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, now's the time. At the back, there's a young lady there. And then we have one that is, I believe, a Schwartzman scholar.
Yes.
Wonderful. We have 3 tables of them. Welcome. Okay, the ladies first.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Professor Kiso, Ambassador. I'm glad to meet you again because last Wednesday you have a talk at the Hong Kong U. You talk about the universality of the West in tackling the climate change issues. Actually, I have a question about conflict mediation because I'm a mediator and also a fellow to the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. My question is, in mediation, we used to assist parties to identify common grounds or common interests. So, but there are also, although there are certain areas of common concerns about between the global south, between the global north and the global majority, such as climate change, combating terrorism and AI development, there appears no common grounds. So, as a peace advocate, can you give us some suggestions about how you can identify common grounds for peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peace building? Especially for climate change, there are also arguments about the principle of common but differentiate responsibility and respective capacity being criticized by the West. And also the EU is now imposing tax on the relative poor in developing countries' products through the CBAM. Thank you.
Here, Sean.
Well, that's I must say, that's a very good question. And if indeed we as a human species were becoming more intelligent and more sophisticated, one thing we should stop doing is stop fighting wars and go towards peace building, because peace building saves lives in wars, right? But amazingly, even though in theory we have become more sophisticated, we cannot stop 2 ongoing wars that are going on, the Ukraine war and the Gaza war. And that's an illustration of why, even with all the best peace-building efforts, you cannot stop those sorts of wars. But is there a way of making the world overall a more peaceful place? I think the answer is given by you when you say that we should look at what our common interests are. And certainly, fortunately for humanity now, climate change is not threatening just one country or 2 countries, it's threatening all of us. So the logical response is for all of humanity to come together and cooperate to deal with climate change. That should be the number 1 priority. But this is something, frankly, that people of my generation have not become convinced of. And in many ways, people of my generation don't worry too much about climate change because we're not going to suffer the consequences 30 years from now, right? Which is why the voice of the younger people on climate change must become much louder. You must emphasize to the world that forget the differences between US and China, forget the differences between Russia and Europe or Israel and Palestine. Focus now on the key overwhelming threat that humanity faces, which is climate change. So if you can persuade the young people to speak out more loudly, there will be a big difference. But at the same time, please make sure that Donald Trump doesn't get elected, because if Donald Trump gets elected, the fight against climate change is gone for 4 years.
The gentleman from Schwartzman, and then David Pong, and then there's table 9, and then I got Eddie. That table has two questions. The Schwartzman scholar, please.
Thank you, Ambassador, for coming to speak to us. My name is Arjun. I'm a Schwartzman scholar, and I'm a reporter for the Financial Times. I just moved here actually a month ago to cover Asian finance and business. Also, I'm a proud Sindhi. For those who don't know, it's the state on the border between India and Pakistan. So great to see a Sindhi on stage. My question is about the balancing act that Singapore is managing between China and the US. It seems like they've done a pretty good job over the past few years, but there's growing skepticism, led by this idea of Singapore washing by Chinese companies or sort of allegedly Chinese companies like TikTok, Shein. And it feels like there's more skepticism from the American side, especially of Singaporean capital that they sometimes suspect is now actually Chinese capital hidden. So I was wondering whether you think this is still tenable for Singapore to balance so well between the US and China, and if not, then what's the future?
You can see you have to be a Sindhi to ask a very good question.
You mean I asked all the wrong questions?
Sindhis are good. But you're absolutely right. Singapore is under a lot of pressure from both sides on this US-China contest, and it'll be a very delicate path for Singapore. But at the same time, one good thing Singapore has done, which is an asset, is that we have deep reservoirs of goodwill in both Beijing and Washington. And both
really?
understand how Singapore can be very, very useful. So there will be pressures, there will be efforts to say, don't do this, don't do this. But we do our best to explain to them why we do something. And if we believe it serves our interests, we will proceed. So if it serves our interest to have TikTok in Singapore, we will allow TikTok in Singapore. We'll explain why, and we will proceed on that basis. But of course, we also make sure that we don't do anything that they believe will directly harm them. So we will not do something that directly harms the United States or directly harms China. So there's a very careful path, but But what helps Singapore a lot is the fact we are part of ASEAN. And when all the 10 countries, ASEAN countries, come together and say that we don't want to take sides between the US and China, ASEAN creates a very valuable political buffer for Singapore. And fortunately, ASEAN's getting stronger. So I'm reasonably optimistic that if you had to list the countries in the world that can manage the US-China contest, Singapore will be one of those that can do so.
Can ASEAN speak with one voice?
No, ASEAN's secret is that we never speak one voice.
So how can you be a force?
But you see, that's exactly the mystery of ASEAN. You see, nothing is black and white. I mean, ASEAN is a remarkable political animal, right? In theory, you watch ASEAN is progressing. You watch ASEAN in slow motion, it's like a crab. It takes 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, 1 step sidewards. ASEAN seems to be going around in circles all the time. But you look at ASEAN decade by decade, it's becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. But it does so by confusing Ronnie.
I reserve judgment. David Pong, and then table 9 and Eddie.
David Pong, Wing Steel. That was very funny. I think members and friends here would agree when I call you the rock star of modern geopolitics. My question is, democracy is said to be the most efficient way of running a country, and yet at the same time, the best business model is capitalism. And somebody even coined a phrase called democratic capitalism. But in fact, these two are diametrically opposite. One is power to the people, the other one is survival of the fittest. Are we going to muddle through this maze of dichotomy until one day somebody wakes up and then realize that they are the ones who should lead and start a revolution? Or is it another way forward?
Thank you. I must say I would call that a really brilliant question.
Cindy question.
I meant that quite seriously. Yeah? I can tell you that the advanced liberal democratic societies, which used to provide to the world models of good governance, they are all in one way or another failing. I mean, United States functionally, if you look at chapter 7 of my book, Has China Won?, has functionally become a plutocracy, right? And you're right, there's a tension between democracy, where it's government of the people, by the people, for the people, and capitalism, which benefits the richest, and the government of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. And the United States, unfortunately, has moved towards plutocracy, and that's creating an incredible backlash. In the same way, many of the European Union members, as you know, are struggling. the far-right parties are winning. And France hasn't had a government for I don't know how long, several months now. Okay? So fortunately there's someone who's analyzed these questions quite well. He's a well-known Financial Times commentator, Martin Wolf, and he wrote a book called The Crisis of Democratic Capitalism. And if you read his book, he describes very well why there are tensions in democratic capitalist societies. And at the end of the day, you've got to create a very fine balance where you give something to capitalism, something to democracy, but don't fall to either extreme, because if you fall to either extreme, then your society is in trouble.
偷偷告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹饪。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。